Hi, this is Shady Atia, Professor of Sustainable Architecture and Building Technology at Liège University in Belgium. Today I'm going to talk about case studies as part of the qualitative research methods. Well, this presentation is part of a playlist on qualitative research methods. I invite you to watch previous videos on qualitative research methods as a preparation for this presentation. As you know, research can be divided under two methodologies: the quantitative approach, where we look at modeling, empirical and experimental, and the qualitative approach, where we look at qualitative research methodologies. The word case study is a very contradictory word that creates a lot of confusion. We can use case studies in the four major research methodology. We can use case study in modeling, case study in empirical research, case study in experimental, and case study in qualitative research. In itself, the word case study, it's not a research methodology. It's just a frame that can allow us to perform under this context or apply different research methodology. So it is not a research methodology. However, it's important to talk about case study within the context of qualitative research. So the presentation is limited to case studies done with qualitative research methods. If you want to talk about case studies involving statistical techniques, for example, then you need to not watch this video, because it's not related to case studies in the empirical or in the modeling or even in the experimental approach. Another important thing to say here is that some researchers do mixed research approaches. So they use mixed methodologies. So they can do a case study combining qualitative and empirical research methodologies. This is also possible, but again, I'm not going to talk about the mixed method. Today, I'm only talking about qualitative research when you want to apply qualitative research method within a case study approach. So a case study is more an approach. Well, case study is a mix of, it's an approach, it's not a research methodology, it's not a research method, and therefore, when you do case studies, you will need to define for your case study research methods. And since we are here under the qualitative research methodologies explanation or presentation, you can combine for your case study different desk methods or people-based methods. You can combine for your case study methods related to population, like you can see here, observation, focus group, interviews, surveys, or you can combine it with documents. You can combine both together. So under the case study, when somebody asks me, I'm doing a case study research, first question I ask them, qualitative or quantitative? If they tell me it's qualitative, I ask them, what will be the method you will use? Because a case study is an approach. So then I ask them, what will be the method? So for a case study, you can combine literature review with interviews, with observations, with online. But in general, case study is considered as a desktop research if you are not going to do any field work. Okay, who is the audience of this presentation? Mainly the presentation is for researchers who are preparing a research thesis, dissertation, conference journal, or journal publication. And the goal here is to make you able to understand what is a case study as an approach, and what are the different types of case studies and strategies that I can use within my case study approach. The content of this presentation is a definition. What is a case study? What are the approaches? What are the methodologies that we can use under? How to collect data? How to validate data? And what are the takeaway messages? Well, the definition of case study. A case study research is an investigation and analysis of a single or collective cases intended to capture the complexity of the object of the study. So we look here at multiple data collection and analysis methods that are adopted to further develop and understand the case shaped by context and emergent data. So this is the definition of a case study. Now, what are the characteristics of a case study? The use. We look at the use to go in depth, not just use to know the most important factors explaining a situation. We look at the objective, explore, explain, describe. The units are most of the time small, so we have 1 or 2 or 3 case studies, limited number of units. And the variables can be large. We look at large variables, a lot of variables. So if we compare case study to experiment or to survey, the case study under the qualitative approach, we look at exploring, describing, and explanation. We have a small number of cases to conduct our research, and we look at a large number of variables compared to the experiment and the survey. Experiment and survey are considered more like quantitative research methodologies, while case study is an approach under the qualitative research. Now, case studies are requiring to have independent variables, interaction of variables with the wide context. And as you can see, this can be a case study for a building where we are doing a post-occupancy evaluation. We are evaluating the comfort and interaction of users with the living environment. And in this sense, we used a building as a case study, and we started to use different methods to test our, to conduct our research. We do measurement, which is empirical. We do profiling, which is ethnographic observation. We take pictures, observation. So these are methods that serve the same case study. Now, what are the approaches of case studies? First of all, we look at a research question directly that reflects a problem. So this is simply the beginning. We can have a single case or we can have multiple cases. When we have multiple cases, we can do cross-analysis between these cases. Now, when we do, why should we select only one case? When we do an investigation for a critical case, when we want to test a case, so we have one single case, a unique situation, where we want to confirm or refute a theory. This is when we do only one case. Or when we do not have enough information of a new situation or phenomena or a complex situation that is very context specific, so we pick up a case that represents this phenomena and highlight it. Also, we can look at a single case study when we have an extreme or unique case, not a common case, and we look at representative or typical cases in a very specific context. So here we capture the condition on a daily basis. So these are the conditions to do only one single case study. Now, if you are going to select several case studies or multiple ones, you have to have different types of comparisons, because you will follow a comparative approach, which depends on the number of different cases. You can have two types of situations. Either you have multiple cases where you do comparison between different case studies, or you can have a simple case where you do comparison of subgroups or subsystems for different case studies. So those are the two approaches when you do multiple case studies analysis. And for sure, this comparison requires to be done over time. And it needs to be compared to the original theory that you build up on your research question. Now, what is the methodology I can use to conduct a case study approach research? There is a lot of methods that you can use under the qualitative research approach. First of all, you can do observation, interviews on the topic studied, perception surveys, creating profiles. You can do life histories, you can do logbooks, you can do pictures, you can do sketching, you can do historical analysis. These are all topics. And we have a video that we presented before on observation. You can watch it if you want to do observation. We have a video on interviews. We have a video on the observation covering most of these. We'll have a video on sketching, how to do sketching or use it as a method. So these are all research methods that are qualitative that you will use to perform your case studies. For sure, you need also take into account the time, how much time it will take me to conduct my research. How can I collect data for a case study? Well, first of all, observation. This is the most common way or the most common research method to perform case studies. You look at participant observations, you can do ethnographic research, you can do systematic observation. Also, you do interviews. It's part of case studies research. You can look at open-ended questions, focused or semi-structured interviews or structured interviews, it depends on the situation. And you do something called documents and records review. You start to document the situation or the case. If it's people, if it's a building, is it an object, is it an artifact, and you start to look at records, diaries, plans, and sections, for example. So these are the three major methods that you can use to generate knowledge in relation to your case study approach. Now, what should I do when I start analyzing the data? I need to prepare my data, start during the data collection, meaning that do not wait till the last minute. You can already start collecting data on your case study and directly work on analyzing your data. How will the data be organized? This is a question that you will need to answer. What analysis strategy I'm going to use? Am I going to follow a theoretical proposition? Am I going to develop a conceptual framework at the end? It's up to you how you will formulate the findings and the outcomes of your work. Now, how can I validate my case study? And how can I validate this approach that is a very subjective approach under the qualitative research context? Well, the problem of validity, in order to maintain the creativity and flexibility that is valued in this methodology, you need to have clearer description of the paradigm or the theoretical position, and the methods should be also provided so that the study findings are not undervalued or undercredited. You need to find a theory to connect your case study findings and insights to. Otherwise, the case study will very much easier undervalued and discredited, and I do not advise students to use this approach of case study when they do not have enough experience with other research methods, because it's a very, yes, from one side a rich method, or sorry, approach. The case study is a rich approach. However, it is very tricky to prove that it is scientific. So there is a lot of judgment on case study approaches. They are considered as unreliable, self-reported data. They generate unreliable, self-reported data. They generate they are based on unsubstantiated observations. They are post-hoc unsystematic, provide post-hoc unsystematic summaries, and they are based on speculation and overgeneralization. So keeping the validity problem in mind from the beginning will make it very important to choose this approach or not. It is one of the most difficult approaches, that you do a case study and you generalize out of it something. Very difficult. We do not use a case study approach if we want to generate knowledge that we want to generalize. No. In this case, we want to investigate a very specific situation or case or condition, and this condition is very context specific, and we want to understand this condition, and therefore we use this case study approach. Now, coming to validity in research, by default, doing a case study approach under the qualitative research methods makes it by default subjective. The findings are subjective. Now, it is up to you to prove that you used methods and you avoided bias to make sure that you have a valid scientific approach. Now, we look mainly when we do case studies to internal validity because it's difficult to address the external validity. And in this sense, we ask ourselves how to assure the quality of our research and how to make sure that we have a rigorous approach. To validate a case study approach, you need to address external validity, and there is a lot of main disadvantages. Like I said, it's difficult. Everything related to external validity, not suitable for generalization, so that's difficult. But you can look at internal validity, like the difficulties, how to prove the validity of your work. You can use triangulation, like making 3 points or 3 different methods of testing the quality of your data and your intention and your interpretation. And you can investigate the reliability by looking at open design and different methods. And you can be transparent with your documentation and describe everything you did in your methodology. Now, when we look at internal validity for case study approaches, the context must be described in detail to understand all relevant elements. This is one point very important. Another important point, you need to do pattern recognition and matching. You try to identify any relevance or any match or any patterns in your case studies. And you can even compare it. And in this sense, I prefer the comparative or the multiple case study approach. You need to look at citations of similar case studies, methodological approaches. So you see other researchers who use the same approach and make sure that you are aligned with this approach. And for reliability, you can use the case study protocol and describe it. How did you do your protocol? What is your research design? And you need to do triangulation of your sources, meaning that the sources of information that you collected to describe and build up your case study need to be triangulated, coming from 3 different places to make sure that there is confidence in your outcomes. Well, the takeaway message for this presentation on case study approach. Recommendation number 1, case studies can be qualitative and or quantitative, and case studies have been considered as a research strategy or design, and an evaluation method and a reporting mode. So take into account it's not a research method in itself. The case study must be significant when you select a case study. The selection criteria must be clear and respected. And 90% of young researchers, when you ask them what was your research criteria that you used to select your case study, they fail to answer this question. They are unable to think in a methodological and scientific way to say, first, we will set a criteria and we will test these criteria and validate them, and then we will conduct our research to identify the case study. They come first with a case study and then they try to do it the other way around. So this is a very crucial point. The selection criteria of your case study must be done beforehand, and then you select your case study. The case study must be complete. You cannot have it incomplete. And you must display sufficient evidence that you try to provide and collect as much as possible evidence when you did your case study, and you used reliable qualitative or quantitative research method to bring data in your method. And we said 3 major methods that you can use: observations, interviews, documentation. Finally, also the purpose of a case study to bring insights. If I go in your results and discussion section and I do not find insights, then the whole case study work is not valuable. So this is the purpose. We get data from a context-specific case where we cannot generalize the outcome, but we seek insights, high, deep insights. Recommendation number 2, case study methods, if qualitative, cannot be generalizable, and that we said before. Ensure the bias is not evident through validation. Address the ethical issues. Describe the theoretical framework that you used for your research. So your conceptual study framework need to be transparent and clear. And all your method that you are used, seek and follow specialist methodological advice when you develop it. Do not embark on this approach alone. Validate and validate and validate with your supervisors, with your peers, to make sure that this approach will be not undermined, it's encouraged, and it can be professionally productive and getting insights in relation to the content. Also, the study design should be consistent with the methodology reported. Unfortunately, a large part of people, when they conduct this approach of research, we found that they are describing a methodology that is not consistent with what they report. So what you are doing or what you say that you will do should be matching what you found. Otherwise, there is an inconsistency. So the learned lesson here is that in-depth data collection involving multiple sources of information is the aim and the purpose of case study approach. Case study analysis is time-consuming depending on the case, and it can be considered a robust research method, particularly when a holistic, in-depth investigation is conducted. So I had to warn you early on this approach, but in the same time, it's a rewarding approach to conduct research under the qualitative research methods. Finally, you must learn from other journal papers. Look at journal paper published work that is recent in peer-reviewed publications with a good reputation, follow the approach and check how it was done to make sure that you will have a professional and validated methodological approach, and that you come up with insight that can bring an added value to your research. Well, that's the end of the presentation. Don't forget that a case study is an approach and it needs to be based on methods, and therefore I invite you to check the previous videos or the whole video set on qualitative research methods under the qualitative methodology playlist. And by that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and this was a presentation on the case study approach as a research approach under the qualitative research methodology. Thank you for your attention.